We will go out in the world and we will say who we are. We will lift our voices strong and face the tide. There is one prevailing justice and it's ours to uphold. We will go out into the world. We will go out in the world.
Welcome, friends, to the weekend worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. Once again, we gather on screens and devices, knowing that we are united in spirit to worship together, to celebrate, to lift up what is sacred among us. If you're joining us for the first time today, or if you're new to our community, we send you our very warmest greetings and invite you to check out our website or our social media channels to learn more about our church community. Thank you so much for being with us today. Just a couple of announcements as we begin. First, our friends in the Religious Education Department have partnered with Utah Refugee Connection to host a spring cleaning drive for refugees in our community. We're asking for donations of cleaning supplies or a cash donation if you don't have time to get to the store. You can pick up the items and drop them off in the red bin at the north doors of the church building. Or you can use our website donate button or Givelify app to donate cash. You'll find the links to sign up and to donate in your Torch email this week. Second, just another reminder that if you've always wanted to attend our association's General Assembly, registration is now open. This year's WHERE lectures have just been announced. The Saturday night speakers for this year's General Assembly are Stacey Abrams and Desmond Meade. I am so excited, and it's just a taste of how exciting this year's GA will be. Now, the cost to register for this year's all-virtual event is only $200. It's never that inexpensive, so it's a real opportunity. And you'll have access to a week's worth of worship services, workshops, and discussions of the ongoing developments in Unitarian Universalism. You can reach out to me if you have any questions about attending virtual GA. I'd love to see several people from our congregation attend. And now, as we begin, worship for Unitarian Universalists is not a sacrifice to a deity, as in many faiths, but rather a commitment to the highest ideals in life. And it is also a place where we lay upon life's altar our joys and our griefs, recognizing that life's tapestry is, as William Blake put it, joy and woe woven fine. The subject of our service today is Earth Day, but you'll also hear about the congregation's great joy this week. And I've also set out 2 candles today for Dante Wright and Adam Toledo, 2 more young men whose names we add to the long list of people of color killed by police in our country. Today I want to light our chalice in their memory as we rekindle our fierce resolve to reject white supremacy and police brutality. Symbol of light and knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. May this chalice we light today be also a symbol of courage and conviction, of rage and grief, of joy and resistance, as we celebrate justice and mourn its absence, as we affirm that the lives of people of color matter, as we struggle on toward a world in which all shall be truly free.
My favorite line from our church covenant is this: "Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law." Over 3 years ago, I sat here in Little Chapel with our children and youth and talked about the idea of becoming a sanctuary church. It was theoretical, an idea. While the adult community was in worship, listening to local leaders and Reverend Tom discuss the impact on our community, our values, and the very real lives of others, our children and youth were learning about the undocumented experience in our community. They were creating art to hang in our new guest room and tying blankets for their beds to welcome them into our church. We started putting butterflies around our spaces. Monarch butterflies, like this puppet, have become a symbol of the sanctuary movement. Monarch butterflies migrate. They leave the home of their birth in search of a new life in a different place. When we welcomed Vicky, Yoretzi, and Bella into our church on that cold January night, we were living out the fulfillment of our covenant, our agreements to one another. That love is our spirit, which moved us into service. As Unitarian Universalists, our values call us into action. Our church answered that call, and I have never been prouder. Except maybe this week. While our commitment to Vicky and her family does not end, hearing the bells ring, watching her walk out our doors, I swelled with pride. Watching now not a stranger, not an idea, but a friend, spread her beautiful wings and fly from our spaces. Vicky has left an indelible mark on our community. When we consider this week is also Earth Day, I am reminded of our interconnected web. This web connects us to one another throughout our planet. I've talked about this web of ours a lot, that we are part of everything. We are part of the soil, the plants, the animals, one another. And once again, I'm thinking of butterflies. There's a theoretical mathematician and meteorologist, Edward Lorenz, who extrapolated that our universe is so very connected to one another that something as simple as the flap of a butterfly's wings can change our world. This web, this butterfly known as Vicky, has changed our world here at First Unitarian Church. We will never be the same. May we as a community continue to be guided by love that moves us into service for others, connected in this incredible web of existence. May it be so.
1,170 some odd days ago, our congregation gathered here in this historic sanctuary and made a historic decision. A woman we'd never met, a Honduran woman with 2 small kids, one of them just a tiny baby, was knocking on our door, asking us to let them in. She'd been living in the United States with her family for some time, but she didn't have papers. And the forces of the government were bearing down on her. She was on her way to the airport to leave this country and return to a place where she would be welcomed home only by danger and uncertainty, when she turned around and came to us asking for sanctuary. We gathered in this space, shoulder to shoulder, and we used the power of our democratic processes to say yes to Vicky and her children, to say yes to love and courage, to say no to the forces of white supremacy and racism and intolerance. We knew we couldn't face it all down, not all of it, but we would not say no to the thing that we could do. This week, quite suddenly, Vicky received an email from her lawyer that no one expected. A stay has been granted, meaning that Vicky can really, truly go free. She no longer has to be confined in our church. Her children can walk on the streets of their own neighborhood, and Vicky can walk with them. She can go and buy her own groceries, attend classes to advance her education, spend time with family. In short, do the things that we who have the privilege of papers can do without thinking about them. Between that tender, tentative first week and this triumphant one have transpired over 1,000 days and nights of worry, boredom, loneliness, but also days of bravery, love, unflagging hope, hope that inspired us, hope that will always inspire us whenever we think of Vicky in the future, hope that carried her through until this week when she was finally able to stand on the steps of our church and breathe the free air and listen to the bells ring out freedom all around her. None of us ever knew how this was going to end. Nevertheless, we never gave up hope. And even when we weren't sure what we would do next, Vicky never gave up. And that gave us the strength to keep on fighting one more day. Now Vicky is free to go home, and you may feel some sadness mingled with your joy. It would be so nice to see her and the girls, to give them a hug and tell them all our hopes for their future and the future of our country. That day will come, have faith, but not yet. For now, we send our love to Vicky, a free woman, through our phones, through social media, through our prayers and well wishes. We recommit to fighting for comprehensive immigration reform that values all the people who have come to the United States, whether fleeing violence and oppression, or seeking a better life, or believing in the power of the American dream, or all of the above. We recommit to doing our parts, whether grand gestures or small ones, to make our neighborhoods and cities safe for immigrants, and to champion diversity right here where we live. Dear Vicky, we can't see you right now, but we love you now and always. You will always be a part of our First Unitarian family. We've longed for your freedom almost as much as you have, and we're overjoyed that you have it now. Thank you for trusting us and letting us be a part of your journey. May you and your children always experience safety and love. Amen.
David, that was a great, wonderful, and appropriate piece. Thank you. Thank you for every conceivable flourish that you're able to squeeze into that selection. The euphoria with each flourish certainly reflects the euphoria we are all feeling right now throughout our village called First Unitarian Church. After 3 years and 2.5 months in sanctuary, or as some would call it more forthrightly, house arrest, Vicky Chavez and her daughters are now free to breathe the air and continue life as normally as possible. They have received a stay of removal, good for 1 year, and it's it's the most liberating sense that we have felt in a very, very long time. And I want to thank Vicky very deeply. I want to thank her for the relentless faith that she had put into our church community. And I also want to thank our church community for the billions upon billions of volunteer hours that they have put in for the last 3+ years. Now, today's worship service will examine Earth Day. And you may wonder, what does Vicky's stay of removal have to do with Earth Day, aside from the fact that just a couple of days ago, the earth shook with gladness. Well, the common thread between the two is hope. We must never allow ourselves to enter the existential space known as hopelessness. It is easy to fall into that abyss when protests and pure common sense fail to move the wall of irrational thought and defiance. And yet, when the bleakest hour is at hand, change can occur. We must always, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the issues, we must never surrender hope. Now, this applies also to the dangers of global warming. Our hope, like in Vicky's case, must be an active hope. We can't sit around waiting while thinking good thoughts and then, somehow miraculously this will all be taken care of. Doesn't work that way. On Thursday, we will recognize the 51st consecutive Earth Day dating back to 1970. These Earth Day celebrations initially began as reminders that, we are part of nature, and we need to become ever more mindful of how everything is interconnected in this awesome web of existence. Now, the tone at the beginning of Earth Days, half a century ago, that tone was almost playful as we gave nature a second look to admire its splendor and appreciate its ability to enliven us. We also made note of Earth's fragility. The overriding sense was that we need to take better care of our planet. Earth Day started becoming, shall we say, less fun when environmentalists warned of climate change as a real possibility. And the Earth was going to warm up sooner than we could ever imagine. Bill McKibben got our attention in his 1989 publication, The End of Nature. But the buzz on the street was that McKibben, he's such an alarmist. But I recall that just about all Unitarian Universalists, at least in this church, didn't think that McKibben was a particular alarmist. Progressives everywhere, in fact, hoped that McKibben's book, along with the growing number of serious climatologists whose biting forecasts of the Earth's future could simply stop you in your tracks, that this would all somehow be enough to shatter the huge denial that was taking place, preventing us from moving forward. But there were still far too many voices raised that felt that if we only got rid of the scientists, well, then the world would be a much happier place. Go figure. Earth Day became a sort of cri de coeur, an impassioned protest to stop the insanity of the fossil fuel industry. And Earth Day asked so bluntly, with each succeeding year, why are the nations of the world not united in efforts to curb CO2 emissions? How perilously close must we come to extinction before we blink? Well, human extinction appears now on the Earth Day radar as ranging from likely to inevitable. Earth Day has lost its fun, spirited luster. It's now a matter of unprecedented ways to work cooperatively to save the planet. I mean, we've come to the point where there's no wiggle room. We've got to get together to save the planet for our children, for our grandchildren, because there simply is not enough of us willing to make personal changes for the common good. You know, this obstinate surge to preserve individual freedom rather than surrender a shred of one's right to pursue one's own happiness has evolved into a destructive American mindset. It's flagrant narcissism that keeps us indulging in our own petty concerns where change is given a shrug of indifference. Global warming is no longer a theory about the Earth's future. We are in it. Global warming constitutes a devastating reality that haunts us daily. And yet, denial as an excuse not to change remains steadfast, despite the wildfires and floods, despite the intensity of storms and the rapid extinction of species, despite climate change survivors who must migrate to new lands in order to survive, just to survive because of all the droughts. The pandemic revealed a lot about human nature in the 2020s. I think it showed us all that just simply wearing a mask, getting vaccinated, are endemic to this belief that one lives solely for oneself. Now, even the future of our own children is dismissed with pitiful rationalizations that the changes called for they're merely part of a socialist agenda. Imagine that. Wendell Berry, whom I would hardly call a socialist, but a farmer, poet, whose hands and sweat have worked intimately with his earth. It was a couple of years ago that he put a series of essays together under the collection, or the collection is now under the title of Our Only World. Our only world. It's the inclusion of the word only that suggests that we do not have the luxury of being so self-absorbed. Including the word only raises significant questions. Our only world, okay? If this is our only world, why do we fail to understand that our only world is finite in its resources? We can ill afford to think of plumbing the remaining resources exclusively for our own purposes. Why are we making our world so inhospitable to humankind and other species? Why do we fail to connect our moral principles, the way we live? Why don't we connect them? Why can't we conceivably connect them with environmental principles, the way we need to live in order to sustain life on this planet? How can anyone miss the message implied in our only world, meaning that the earth is our only source of shelter and sustenance? How do we honor our responsibility to future generations if we don't quickly learn such human virtues as cooperation, respect, prudence, foresight, justice? And finally, how much longer can we pretend that our neglect to take action bears monumental consequences? One more helpful reference to Wendell Berry, his definition of an ecosystem. You know, it's really not that hard to understand at all. This is how he defines an ecosystem. An ecosystem is the web of connections by which a place and its creatures sustain a mutual life. Let me say that one more time. An ecosystem is a web of connections by which a place and its creatures sustain a mutual life. I wonder, has the concept of mutuality become a subversive way of life? You know, we need to look no further than the U.S. Senate, where cooperation is considered anathema. I mean, it's a dilution of power. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter what the subject is that's on the table, be it the environment, democracy, justice, or even gun control, where owning an AK-47 is a personal right guaranteed by the Constitution, which of course was written when the only firearm was a musket. The philosophy that distorts our moral compass insists that we are separate from one another, and thus we only need to think of ourselves. We are separate from nature, meaning that we have an inherent privilege as human beings. Human exceptionalism, much like American exceptionalism, rides on a false premise that we can operate in the world sufficiently by ourselves. This view is morally bankrupt. This view conveniently discards, for selfish reasons, discards even a cursory understanding of an ecosystem as a web of relationships by which all creatures, including human beings, are all included and must work together mutually in order to sustain the habitat in which they live. You know, as long as people believe that they are not tied to a web of relationships, the future remains imperiled. Don't you agree? It's simply mind-boggling that enough people in our country can reject the science of ecology as an inconvenient truth, to use Al Gore's apt description, which goes back, more than 20 years. That's how long we've been drumming up this theme. Isn't it amazing? That people don't get there, that they reject the science to the extent whereby they derail any legislative efforts to veer away from this destructive path that we are currently on and have been for a long time. Ecology is not a new concept. A German biologist, Ernst Haeckel, coined the term back in 1866. The root word eco derives from the Greek meaning household. Think back to Wendell Berry's description of an ecosystem as the mutual sustainability of a place or habitat and its creatures. A habitat is essentially a natural household. Eco, Greek root for household. Along with ecology, eco also has other interesting connections like economics and also eco-humanism or ecumenism. The idea of household as the underlying concept for ecology, economics, ecumenism is really quite powerful. All these disciplines attached by the root word eco ought to work in harmony with each other, well, like any household. A household whose many facets do not work together, are incongruent with each other, becomes dysfunctional. Let me explain. Economics studies the management of a household's financial resources. Ecology studies the management of a household's physical resources. Ecumenism studies the management of a household's moral and spiritual resources. So instead of working together to provide a safe, reasonable, strong household, a secure habitat, if you will, we fail to see ourselves as members of the same household. The financial management for our habitat, known as economics, pursues coal, gas, oil, mountaintop removal, drill baby drill, without any regard for maintaining the physical management and providing clean water and air to help sustain the species. And when the moral management, often rooted in many diverse faith traditions, points out that the household suffers due to financial self-interest, weakening the good of the entire household, the moral sphere doesn't stand a chance against the pure greed of want and desire for oneself. Consequently, there are no ethical constraints placed on insatiable appetites always wanting more. And what follows then is a collapse of the habitat's physical necessities that require a mutual and cooperative effort among all creatures that depend on this habitat. So at this point, quite frankly, it's hard to imagine our society acting otherwise. We are entrenched in dysfunctional behavior, separating the human species from all others as though the habitat exists exclusively for us. But on Earth Day and every day, we must continue not only to expose the hard truths of the science that offers evidence of the dying organism called Earth, we must also clarify that the household, our household, cannot be sustained by economics alone. The poet W.S. Merwin understood the obvious by saying that Wall Street has come to define the real world for us. We have forgotten that the real world is actually defined by nature, and the real world suffers as we have grown too careless and reckless. So as we overestimate our importance in the world, thousands of species have been eliminated from our habitat. The polar ice caps are melting, just about gone. Ocean waters are rising, and parts of the Atlantic seaboard are already underwater. And all this transpires because we fail to see ourselves as members of the same household. A habitat must be managed economically, ecologically, and morally. Years ago, during Earth Day services, I would pound this pulpit and cry out, "Hey, we're running out of time." It's different this Earth Day. We have indeed run out of time. The predictions made literally decades ago are now in the very fabric of our day-to-day reality. And so the message this Earth Day is really to double down in our efforts. You know, the me-first mentality cannot hold in restoring our habitat back to health. Let's face it, we can never go back to the air quality we enjoyed the time of our first Earth Day in 1970. But we can, and we must continue with our fierce and persuasive, hopefully persuasive campaigns to stop the current madness and allow people to awaken, realize, understand deep down, viscerally, our dependency on all the species that comprise our habitat. We all belong to the same household. Please, let our voices be heard. Amen.